I assign a reporter to get all the important facts and to write the story. I also assign a news photographer to take pictures. The reporter and photographer will work together as a team. Now the reporter has all the facts. He's ready to write his story. He puts the most important facts in the first few sentences. Then he adds the interesting details.
So let's make a list.
400 codes of conduct around the world, covering all aspects of journalism. Some of them are very short, some of them are very long. But actually all of them are really focused on 5 key values for journalism. And the first of them is accuracy. I won't say truth, because truth is a very long word. It actually gets us into a discussion about really what is true and what is not true. But accuracy is very important. So therefore the first principle is no deceptive handling of the facts. We work in facts, so fact-based information. Secondly, there's the principle of independence. The work that you do is your own work, but it's not on behalf of anyone else. You're not there to be a spokesman for the government. You're not there to be a representative of a particular business group or a special interest group. You have transparency in what you do, so that when you are speaking and dealing with your audience and producing material, you're acting independently as an independent professional. Thirdly, there is the principle of impartiality. That is to say, you recognize that there's more than one side of a story. And very often there's more than 2 sides of a story. And as a journalist, you're responsible for looking and thinking about what are the other sides of this story. Here is one story that's being told, but what are the other opinions that I need to bring in to make the story whole? And then fourthly, there's the question of humanity. As a journalist, you're expected to show humanity. And what I mean by that is you're expected to be aware of the consequences of what you publish and what you broadcast. So you have to be aware that sometimes the words you use, the pictures you show can do damage. They can be harmful to people. It's not the job of a journalist to do undue harm. It's our job to protect people. And it's very important that when we are in reporting, we don't indulge in hate speech. We don't show obscene images. We don't show unnecessarily explicit images of violence and so on, because we are part of a humanitarian process, and that's what journalism should be. So humanity is a very important part of it. And fifthly is the issue of accountability. It's the one that's probably most difficult for journalists, and that's, we're not a humble group. We find it difficult to say sorry and to admit our mistakes, even though we can be lacerating in our criticism of others. But we have to do that. We have to engage with the audience, and we have to correct our mistakes, and we have to be prepared to provide remedies when we get it wrong and do damage. So these principles are pretty straightforward. Accuracy, independence, impartiality, humanity, and accountability. Those are the things that what make journalism different and distinct.
In this video lecture, we'll discuss media ethics. Lately, the media's reputation has been under attack. Of course, we all know how President Donald Trump feels about the media, but even the average American doesn't have a high opinion of the media. In short, the vast majority of the public, including Republicans and Democrats alike, believe the media is unethical. So today, we'll examine the reasons why. We'll also discuss some of the hot spots that raise ethical concerns for journalists, along with ethical guidelines for journalists. First, let's begin with a little history. Part of the reason the public is disappointed in the press is because they have high standards for journalists. In short, we've come to expect journalists to be accurate and objective. But it wasn't always this way. The notion that journalists should be honest and fair is only about a century old. The early American press was partisan, biased, and often inaccurate. Events such as the Civil War and public backlash against dishonest journalism practices led to a transformation of the profession in America. The Civil War during the 1860s pitted northern states versus southern states, and media outlets such as the Associated Press found themselves having to sell stories to newspapers in both regions. As a result, the reporters simply reported on who won battles in a neutral and factual manner, rather than injecting pro-North or pro-South opinions into their coverage. Shortly after that, there was a strong public push for accurate and fair reporting, following backlash against what was known as yellow journalism. 2 prominent newspaper publishers, Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, had been engaged in a competition for readers and seemed willing to sell newspapers at any cost. For example, the United States entered a war against Spain in 1898 due to a fake news story Hearst published in his newspapers. So the public demanded better. Journalists began to adopt codes of ethics to ensure better behavior. Principles such as objectivity, telling both sides of the story, verifying rumors to ensure they were accurate and true became standard journalism practice. But now, in the 21st century, many believe we're seeing a return to the old days of a partisan, biased, and unreliable press. Consider the evidence. According to a 2016 poll, trust in the media hit an all-time low, with only 32% of Americans saying they had confidence in the U.S. media. Among younger people, only 26% trusted the press. It still hasn't gotten any better. A 2018 survey of people in 38 nations found that the media bias was perceived as a bigger problem in the United States than any other country in the world. With very few government regulations, the profession instead must rely on ethics to govern its behavior. Many media outlets follow the code of ethics written by the Society of Professional Journalists. It's organized around 4 principles. First, seek truth and report it. Journalists should be honest, fair, objective, and accurate. Second, minimize harm. Realize that you're covering human beings. Be respectful, tasteful, and sensitive. Note that it says minimize harm. You may not always be able to completely avoid it. If you're doing investigative reporting, for example, your story may expose corruption and cause someone to get fired, but in the end, the greater good will be served by your reporting. Thirdly, act independently. Don't accept gifts or favors. Your only obligation is to serve the public's interest. That's why it's so important to avoid conflicts of interest. Fourth, be accountable. Correct mistakes and expose unethical practices by journalists. Now, journalists don't always succeed in following these 4 principles, but having worked as a journalist for several years, I can tell you that most journalists, especially those outside of the Beltway, aren't evil. Most said there's still plenty of room for improvement, and that's where the public comes in. The public has an important role to play in fixing the problem. Journalism is an institution, but it's also a business. Ultimately, consumers will be the gatekeepers by deciding which stories get clicks and shares and which stories don't get attention. So be part of the solution, not the problem,